The woman's voice was a weapon, a shrill, serrated blade of entitlement that sawed at the quiet air of my property. "This is a community asset now," she declared, her arms crossed over a torso straining the seams of a bright pink blazer. "The board has voted. It was abandoned property, and we have reappropriated it for the good of the neighborhood. You are trespassing." I stood on the porch of the cabin my great-grandfather had built with his own hands, the key dangling from my fingers, and stared at the stranger who had taken up residence in my life. She had the gall to tell me I was trespassing on the land my family had owned for nearly a century. This was not a negotiation. This was a declaration of war. Let me tell you how this all started. For 30 years, I served as a colonel in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. My life was a structured world of blueprints, load-bearing calculations, and logistical campaigns that moved mountains of earth and rerouted rivers. I built things: bridges in unforgiving terrain, airfields on forgotten islands, fortifications that were meant to last. My days were governed by critical paths, contingency plans, and the precise application of overwhelming force to solve intractable problems. When I retired, I wanted the opposite of all that. I wanted silence, unstructured days, and the absence of conflict. I came home to the only place that had ever truly felt like one: 100 acres of North Florida timberland, surrounding a spring-fed lake, with a single, small cabin sitting near its shore. The property was an island of old Florida, a remnant of a time before planned communities and decorative cul-de-sacs. The land had been in my family since before the Great Depression. My great-grandfather had bought it for the timber and the clear water. My grandfather had defended it from developers in the 70s who wanted to ring the lake with condos. My father had cherished it as a weekend escape from his own structured life as a surgeon. And now, it was mine. It was more than land. It was a living repository of my family's history, a trust I was meant to keep. The cabin itself was a testament to simple, honest construction: hewn pine logs, a fieldstone fireplace that drew perfectly, a wide porch that looked out over the still, dark water of the lake. The air smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and thyme. My retirement plan was simple. I would fish. I would read the histories I'd never had time for. I would maintain the property, clearing brush not with an army of bulldozers, but with a chainsaw and my own 2 hands. I would listen to the owls at dusk and the whisper of the wind through the longleaf pines. For the first year, it was exactly that: a profound and well-earned peace. The only sounds were those of nature and the distant hum of the highway several miles away. It was paradise. Then, the first wave of the invasion began. On the adjacent parcel of land to the east, a developer had clear-cut 200 acres of pine forest and begun erecting what they called Serenity Lakes Estates. The name was a cruel joke. The construction was a year-long cacophony of nail guns, reversing beepers, and shouting foremen. The lakes in their name were 2 glorified retention ponds, dyed an unnatural shade of blue that sat baking in the sun. My lake, the real one, sat just beyond their property line, a tantalizing glimpse of authentic nature they used in their marketing brochures without my permission. I consulted a lawyer then. A brief and expensive conversation that confirmed my property lines were inviolate and that their marketing was technically just shy of actionable. So I tolerated it. I put up with the noise, the dust, and the slow, inexorable march of beige stucco houses. The houses were monuments to conformity. Each one was a slight variation of the next, distinguished only by the approved shades of tan, taupe, or greige. The lawns were uniformly green, manicured to within an inch of their lives by competing lawn service companies. The mailboxes were identical black metal boxes on identical white posts. It was a sterile, soulless environment, the architectural equivalent of a society that had given up. Once the residents moved in, the true nature of the place began to reveal itself. An HOA, the Homeowners Association, had been formed, and its president was a woman whose ambition for power was matched only by the sheer volume of her voice, which sometimes carried across the property line on a still day. Her name was Karen, a fact I learned from a discarded newsletter that blew onto my land. She was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic, a petty tyrant ruling a kingdom of vinyl siding and chemically green grass. I had no direct dealings with them, nor did I want any. My property was not part of their association. It was a sovereign nation of woods and water, legally and spiritually separate from their suburban fiefdom. I made sure of that. I had my original survey documents, the county plat maps, and a title search that went back to 1922. My land was an island, and I was content to be its sole inhabitant. My mistake was assuming that facts mattered to people like Karen. I had to leave for 3 weeks in early May. My daughter was having her first child, and my presence in Colorado was non-negotiable. I locked up the cabin, secured my tools in the shed, and arranged for a friend to keep an eye on the place from a distance. I felt a familiar pang of unease leaving it, the same feeling a commander gets when leaving a secure position. But family duty called. I looked forward to returning with the new title of grandfather. The drive back was filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. I couldn't wait to sit on my porch, a cup of coffee in hand, and settle back into the deep peace of the woods. I turned off the county road onto the long gravel drive that led to the cabin. The first sign that something was wrong was a sign. Literally. A professionally printed sign, brown with yellow lettering, had been hammered into a tree at the start of my driveway. It read, "Welcome to the Serenity Lakes Community Clubhouse and Recreation Area." Below that, in smaller letters, "Operated by the Serenity Lakes HOA." A cold knot formed in my stomach. This was not a prank. The sign was too expensive, too official. I drove on, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. As the cabin came into view, the cold knot became a block of ice. My old, comfortable wooden rocking chairs were gone from the porch. In their place sat 2 hideous white plastic Adirondack chairs. A cheap, brightly colored welcome mat with cartoon flip-flops on it lay in front of my door. A string of solar-powered tiki torchlights was draped crookedly along the porch railing. I parked the truck and got out, the familiar crunch of gravel under my boots doing nothing to soothe me. The air was still, but it felt charged, desecrated. I walked up the steps. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Not the familiar scent of pine, old books, and wood smoke, but the cloying chemical sweetness of cheap air freshener, a synthetic vanilla that coated the back of my throat. My furniture was gone. My father's favorite leather armchair, the sturdy oak table my grandfather had built, the bookshelves filled with my books, all vanished. In their place was a collection of flimsy, particle board furniture that looked like it had been sourced from the saddest aisle of a discount store. A beige microfiber sofa sat against one wall. A glass-topped coffee table held a stack of glossy lifestyle magazines. And in the corner, a massive television was mounted to the log wall with aggressive-looking brackets. They hadn't just trespassed. They had colonized the place. They had erased me. A slow, dangerous calm settled over me. This was not a moment for rage. Rage was a wildfire, chaotic and destructive. This moment required the cold, clear focus of a sapper inspecting a command-detonated mine. I did a slow reconnaissance of my home. My bedroom was the same. My personal effects, the few clothes I kept there, my father's old fly rod, a framed photo of my late wife, were gone. The closet was empty. They had packed me up and thrown me out of my own life. I walked back into the main room and saw a laminated sheet of paper on the new, cheap dining table. It was a list of clubhouse rules, complete with the vaguely fascistic eagle logo of the Serenity Lakes HOA. No unsupervised children. No glass containers near the lake. Clubhouse hours, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. A line at the bottom read, "Enjoy your community-provided amenities." It was then that I heard a car approaching. I moved to the window and saw a mid-sized SUV pull up behind my truck. A woman got out. She was ample, wearing a pink blazer that was fighting a losing battle with her frame. It was the woman from the newsletter, the face of the occupation. It was Karen. She marched toward the cabin with an air of absolute ownership, a clipboard in her hand. She saw me standing in the doorway, and her face, for a fleeting second, registered surprise. It was quickly replaced by a mask of stern indignation. This was the moment of our first engagement. "Can I help you?" she demanded, stopping at the bottom of the steps. Her voice was exactly as I had imagined it, a grating symphony of entitlement. I kept my own voice level, cold, and quiet. "You're on private property," she actually scoffed. "I am the president of the Serenity Lakes Homeowners Association. This," she said, gesturing grandly at my cabin, my land, "is the community clubhouse. And you are?" "I'm the owner," I said. That's when she delivered the line that sealed her fate. "This is a community asset now. The board has voted. It was abandoned property, and we have reappropriated it for the good of the neighborhood. You are trespassing." I let the sheer, crystalline absurdity of her statement hang in the air. Abandoned? I was gone for 3 weeks. Reappropriated? That was a bureaucrat's word for stolen. I looked at her, at the self-satisfied smirk on her face, the belief in her own absolute authority. She genuinely thought she had the right. She believed that a vote by her little committee of suburban despots could nullify a century of ownership, a deed, and the fundamental laws of property. "You have made a grave mistake," I said, the words coming out as low as a rumble of distant artillery. "You and your board have committed several felonies, including breaking and entering and grand theft. I suggest you remove yourself and this garbage," I gestured at the plastic chairs, "from my property immediately." Her face flushed a blotchy red. "I will not be spoken to that way. This property was an eyesore, a dilapidated shack that was dragging down our property values. We have improved it. We have a right. I'm calling our security patrol." "You do that," I said, pulling out my phone. "And I'll be calling the sheriff. We'll see whose jurisdiction holds up." The mention of the sheriff gave her the slightest pause. It was the first crack in her armor of self-importance. She hadn't expected resistance. She had expected an absentee owner who would either never come back or would be too intimidated to fight. "You need to vacate the premises," she shrieked, her voice climbing into a register that made the birds in the nearby trees fall silent. "The board will be fining you for unauthorized occupation of a community asset." I just stared at her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I let her exhaust her supply of impotent threats. When she finally sputtered to a stop, I said, "Get off my land. Now." She stared at me for a long moment, her mind clearly struggling to process the situation. Her worldview, in which her authority was absolute, was crashing against the immovable object of my ownership. Finally, with a huff of fury, she turned on her heel, marched back to her SUV, and sped away, kicking up a plume of gravel dust. The silence that descended was profound. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. I stood on my desecrated porch, the smell of her cheap perfume lingering in the air like poison gas. I looked at the tiki torches, the plastic chairs, the sign nailed to my tree. This was not just a dispute. This was an act of aggression, a campaign launched against my peace. And I, a man who had spent his life planning and executing campaigns, knew exactly what to do. My retirement was officially over. That evening, I did not sleep in the cabin. I couldn't. It felt tainted, occupied by the ghost of their presumptuousness. I drove into town, checked into a sterile but blessedly anonymous motel, and went to an office supply store. I purchased a heavy-duty 4-inch D-ring binder, the kind used for major project proposals. I bought a pack of plastic sheet protectors, a set of tab dividers, and a label maker. Back in the motel room, under the buzzing fluorescent lights, I sat at the small desk and began my work. The first thing I did was print a title page. In a bold, clear, sans serif font, I typed, Operation Lakeside Freedom. It was a habit from my former life. Give the mission a name. Define the objective. My objective was not just to win. It was to achieve a victory so total, so decisive, that no one would ever contemplate a similar incursion again. I was not just evicting a squatter. I was dismantling an entire command structure. The first document to go into the binder was a simple, handwritten page. I cataloged everything I had seen. The sign, the plastic chairs, the tiki lights, the missing furniture, with estimated replacement values, the state of the interior, the air freshener, the clubhouse rules. I took photos of everything with my phone and emailed them to myself for safekeeping. Every detail was reconnaissance. Every observation was intelligence. The next day, I began the counter-offensive. I drove back to the property. My furniture was, miraculously, stacked in my old tool shed. They hadn't sold it or thrown it away. They had just warehoused it. Arrogance. They assumed they'd never have to produce it again. I spent the day moving their cheap garbage out onto the lawn near the property line and moving my own life back in. It was a laborious, physically taxing process, but it was also a ritual of reclamation. With every piece of my own furniture I set back in its rightful place, I felt my ownership solidifying, the enemy's presence being purged. By the end of the day, the cabin was almost back to normal. A pile of their junk sat like a refugee camp on the edge of my land, a silent testament to their failed invasion. I sat on my own wooden rocking chair on my own porch, a glass of bourbon in my hand, and watched the sunset paint the lake in hues of orange and purple. A temporary truce. I knew the paper assault was coming. It arrived 2 days later, via certified mail, a service that required me to drive to the post office and sign for the envelope. This was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to give the document a false weight of legal authority. The envelope itself was thick cream-colored cardstock, heavy and expensive. In the top left corner was the embossed logo of the Serenity Lakes HOA, an eagle that looked more like a vulture, clutching a golf club and a tennis racket in its talons. It was so absurd it was almost beautiful, vaguely fascistic as I'd thought. I opened it back at the cabin. The letter was printed on the same heavy bond paper. The language was a masterclass in bureaucratic aggression. It was a formal notice of violation and intent to lien. It informed me that I, Jack Callahan, was in violation of HOA covenants, Section 12, Paragraph 4. Unauthorized occupation of a community asset. It stated that I had illegally removed HOA property, the cheap furniture, from the clubhouse and had failed to vacate the premises upon request. The penalty was breathtaking in its audacity: a fine of $5,000 for the unauthorized occupation, an additional $1,000 for the removal of HOA property, a daily fine of $200 until I returned the community asset to the association's control. It concluded by stating that if the fines were not paid and the property not vacated within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property and begin foreclosure proceedings. It was signed, in a florid, self-important script, by Karen Miller, President, Serenity Lakes HOA, and co-signed by the other 4 members of her board. Their names were now on a document. They had officially enlisted in her suicide mission. I read the letter twice, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. This was not a threat. This was a gift. This was the enemy committing their entire strategy to paper, a signed confession of their own stupidity. I carefully slid the letter and the certified mail receipt into a fresh plastic sleeve. It became page 2 of Operation Lakeside Freedom. The next phase of any campaign is intelligence gathering. You must know the enemy's terrain, their order of battle, and their doctrine. In this case, their doctrine was the HOA's own set of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs. A quick search of the county's public records website yielded the full document, a 78-page PDF of dense legalese. I spent the entire afternoon reading it, highlighting sections and making notes. It was as tedious as reviewing concrete pouring specifications, but just as necessary. The document was a monument to petty control. It dictated the acceptable colors for front doors, the maximum height of fences, the types of shrubs one could plant, the prohibition of visible trash cans, basketball hoops, and political signs. It was a blueprint for a life devoid of personality or spontaneity. But I wasn't looking for evidence of their tyranny. I was looking for their vulnerabilities. I found 2. First, the section on annexing new property was incredibly specific. It required a 75% vote of the entire membership, a new survey to be filed with the county, and the willing, written consent of the owner of the property to be annexed. They had, of course, done none of those things. Second, their own rules for levying fines required them to send 2 written warnings before any fine over $500 could be issued. They had jumped straight to the nuclear option. They were violating their own bylaws. But the real kill shot lay in a different set of documents. The next morning, I drove to the county government center, a soulless brick building that smelled of floor wax and quiet desperation. I went to the records office. I requested the original plat maps for the Serenity Lakes Estates subdivision, filed by the developer, and a certified copy of my own deed. The clerk was a woman who looked like she had been bored since the Carter administration. She took my request with a sigh and disappeared into a back room. 20 minutes later, she returned with a large, rolled-up map and a file folder. She spread the map across a wide table. It was the master plan for their entire world. There were the cookie-cutter lots, the curved roads with their pastoral names, Whispering Creek Lane, Silent Meadow Drive, and the 2 blue retention ponds. And there, on the western edge, was my property. It was clearly delineated by a thick, solid line. And inside that line, in clear block letters, were the words, Parcel 7B, not included in this plat. It was the cartographic equivalent of a slam dunk. My land was not just absent from their association, it was explicitly, legally, and permanently excluded. The developer had made it crystal clear. This map was not their opinion. This was a legal document, the very foundation upon which their entire subdivision was built. "I need a certified, full-size copy of this," I told the clerk. She looked at the map, then at me. "Trouble with the HOA?" "You could say that," I said. A flicker of something, amusement, solidarity, crossed her face. "That'll be $40. Best 40 you'll ever spend." She stamped the copy with a heavy embosser, signed it, and handed it to me. It felt as solid and real as a weapon. Now I had the high ground. The next step was to build my forces. A single soldier, no matter how well prepared, is vulnerable. An army, even a small one, can change the world. I needed allies. I needed to launch an insurgency. My first recruitment drive began that afternoon. I drove into Serenity Lakes Estates, not as an invader, but as an observer. I parked on a public street and simply walked. The oppression was palpable. Every lawn was perfect. Every house was silent. It was a neighborhood holding its breath. Then I saw it. An elderly woman on her knees in her front garden, carefully digging up a small, decorative bird feeder. She looked up as I approached, her face a mask of weary resignation. "Afternoon," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "That's a nice feeder." She gave me a watery, sad smile. "Not anymore, it isn't. Got my second notice today. It's not on the approved list of lawn ornaments. One more notice, and it's a $200 fine." She sighed and patted the earth where the feeder had stood. "My late husband gave it to me. The birds liked it." "My name is Jack," I said. "I live over on the lake." Her eyes widened slightly. "You're the one. Karen is very upset with you." "The feeling is mutual," I said. "What's your name?" "I'm Eleanor Gable," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I spent 20 minutes talking to Mrs. Gable. I listened to her story. Fines for her garbage can being visible from the street for 10 minutes after the truck had passed. A warning for having a welcome mat that was deemed excessively whimsical. It was a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts, designed to bleed the spirit out of people. "She just wants control," Mrs. Gable whispered, as if Karen herself might be listening. "Most of us just pay the fines. It's easier than fighting." "It's only easier until it isn't," I said. "Mrs. Gable, would you be willing to let me have copies of those violation notices?" She looked nervous, a recruit on the verge of enlisting, but afraid of the cost. "What for?" "I'm putting together a file," I said. "A pattern of behavior is a powerful thing." She thought for a long moment, then nodded. "Let me go get them." I left Mrs. Gable's house with my first set of Allied intelligence documents. 2 more patrols of the neighborhood that day yielded similar results. I met the Martinez family, a young couple with 2 small kids who had been fined into submission for having a portable plastic basketball hoop in their driveway. I spoke to a man who had been cited for his pickup truck, which was a commercial vehicle and not allowed to be parked in a driveway overnight. Everyone had a story. Everyone was afraid. They had been fighting alone, isolated skirmishes against a superior force. They hadn't realized they were all part of the same war. I collected their stories, their violation notices, their quiet, simmering rage. Each one went into a plastic sleeve in the binder. Operation Lakeside Freedom was no longer a solo mission. It was now the field manual for a rebellion. The binder was getting thick. I had the legal foundation, the maps, the enemy's own signed confession, and now witness statements from a dozen other fronts in Karen's war on normalcy. It was a solid case, But I was an engineer, not a lawyer. A commander knows when to call in air support. It was time to bring in the heavy ordnance. I called Marcus Thorne. Marcus and I had served together 2 decades ago. He was a young JAG captain then, sharp, aggressive, and utterly fearless in a courtroom. I had seen him tear apart a government contractor's flimsy excuses for a shoddy construction job with a precision that was both terrifying and beautiful. He had since left the Army and become a partner at a high-powered law firm, specializing in real estate and contract litigation. He was, in short, a shark, and I was about to chum the waters. "Jack, you old bastard," he boomed over the phone. "I thought you'd be off wrestling gators and drinking moonshine by now. Don't tell me you're bored already." "Not bored, Marcus. I'm at war." There was a pause, and the tone of his voice changed, becoming focused. "Okay. Tell me." I gave him the short version: the cabin, the 3-week trip, the illegal occupation, the fake furniture, the violation notice. I could hear him grinning. "Oh, this is beautiful. This is the kind of case that makes me glad I went to law school. Did they put anything in writing?" "I have a signed and certified letter threatening to foreclose on my property," I said. He actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of pure, predatory glee. "They signed it? Oh, they are so screwed. Meet me at my office tomorrow, 1000 hours, and bring everything you have." I arrived at his office, a sleek glass and steel affair that screamed money and success, with my binder tucked under my arm. Marcus, older but still with the same restless energy, greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to a conference room with a view of the city. "All right, Colonel," he said. "Show me the opposition research." I laid the binder on the polished mahogany table and opened it. I walked him through it, section by section. The photos of the occupied cabin, the list of my missing property, Karen's clubhouse rules, the threatening letter, then the counterintelligence, the HOA's own bylaws with my highlighted notes showing their procedural violations, and finally, the crown jewel, the certified county plat map, explicitly excluding my land. I finished by showing him the stack of violation notices I had collected from the other residents. He was silent for a full minute after I finished, slowly turning the plastic-sleeved pages. He looked at me, and his eyes were shining. "Jack, this is a work of art. This isn't a file. It's a kill box. You've established a pattern of harassment. You have them dead to rights on trespassing and theft, and you have irrefutable proof that they have absolutely zero jurisdiction, and they put their names on it. The sheer, glorious stupidity is breathtaking." "So what's our first move?" I asked. "Our first move is a letter," he said, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "But it's not going to be a nice letter. We're not asking. We're telling. We are going to draft a cease and desist so aggressive it's going to make their hair fall out. We'll cite criminal statutes: trespassing, breaking and entering, grand theft, attempted extortion. We will name Karen and every single board member personally. We will inform them that their actions fall outside the scope of their duties as board members, meaning the HOA's liability insurance will not protect them. We will make it very, very clear that their personal assets, their houses, their cars, their savings, are now on the table. We're not just threatening a lawsuit against the HOA," he continued, warming to his subject. "We are threatening to ruin each of them individually. We will send it via process server to each of their homes. Let their spouses see what kind of mess they've gotten themselves into." "The goal isn't to get them to back down," Marcus explained. A bully like this, Karen won't back down. She'll double down. This letter is a range-finding shot. We want her to get angry and do something even more stupid. We're not just defending. We're setting a trap. He was right. A creature like Karen operated on pure ego. A direct challenge to her authority wouldn't make her cautious. It would make her furious. 2 days later, Marcus's letter, a 10-page masterpiece of legal venom, was delivered. I imagined the scene. The knock on the door, the confused spouse, the opening of the envelope, the slow, dawning horror. For 2 days, there was silence. The pile of cheap furniture still sat on my lawn, untouched. No new notices appeared in my mailbox. It was the quiet before the storm. The enemy's response came, as I predicted, not as a retreat, but as a furious escalation. I received another certified letter. This one informed me of an emergency board meeting to be held in 1 week's time at the community clubhouse. Not my cabin, but a small, sterile room in a building near the entrance to the subdivision. The agenda items were listed. 1. Discussion of hostile actions by non-member Mr. Jack Callahan. 2. Vote on special assessment for legal defense fund. 3. Vote to authorize legal counsel to place a lien and begin foreclosure proceedings against Parcel 7B. She was going through with it. She had read Marcus's letter, a clear and precise declaration of her doom, and had interpreted it as a bluff. Her arrogance was a strategic asset for me now. It was making her predictable. But she had one more move to make before the meeting. The blunder that would seal her fate. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was on my porch, cleaning my father's old shotgun, a purely meditative activity, when I heard the rumble of a heavy truck. A large flatbed from a local company, a One Fencing, was backing down my driveway. Following it was Karen's SUV. This was it, the direct action. I didn't move. I calmly finished reassembling the shotgun, laid it on the table, and picked up my phone, making sure it was recording video. I also picked up a folder containing a copy of my deed, the plat map, and Marcus's letter. I walked down the steps just as a crew of 3 men in dusty jeans and company t-shirts started unloading posts and rolls of chain-link fence. Karen got out of her car, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. "This is your last chance," she announced. "We are securing this community asset. You can cooperate or we can have you removed for obstructing." I ignored her completely. I walked directly to the man, who was obviously the foreman. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and friendly. "My name is Jack Callahan. I'm the owner of this property." He looked from me to Karen, confused. "Ma'am here said this was HOA land. She hired us to put up a security fence." "I understand," I said, "and I'm sure you're just doing your job. However, the woman who hired you has misled you. She has no authority here. This is private property, and it has never been part of the HOA." I handed him the folder. "This is a certified copy of the county plat map, which clearly shows this parcel is excluded from the subdivision. This is a certified copy of my deed of ownership. And this," I said, pointing to the last document, "is a letter from my attorney, which I suggest you read very carefully." The foreman, a big man with a sunburned neck, took the folder and began to read. His eyes widened as he scanned Marcus's letter. He saw the phrases criminal trespassing, personal liability, and named in the lawsuit. He looked at his crew, who had stopped working to watch. He looked at Karen, whose smirk was beginning to falter. He looked back at me. "Sir," he said, handing the folder back, "this says that if we put a fence post in the ground, my company and I, personally, can be sued and charged with a crime." "That is an accurate summary," I confirmed. My phone was still recording, held casually at my side, the lens pointed right at them. The foreman turned to Karen. "Ma'am, I can't do this job. This is a civil dispute and we're not getting in the middle of it." Karen's face went from blotchy red to a shade of purple I had previously only seen in medical textbooks. "I am the president of the HOA. I hired you. You will do as I say, or I will sue your company for breach of contract," she screeched. The foreman just shook his head and started waving his crew back toward the truck. "Sue us all you want. We're not committing a crime for you. We're leaving." "Get back here!" Karen shrieked, her voice cracking with pure rage. "You're fired!" The foreman turned back one last time. "Can't fire us, ma'am. We quit." He then got in his truck and, along with his crew, drove away, leaving Karen standing alone in my driveway amidst the unloaded fence posts. She turned her fury on me. A torrent of insults and threats spewed from her mouth. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my phone still recording, capturing every single unhinged, incriminating syllable. When she finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving, I simply said, "You are still trespassing. Leave." She gave me a look of pure, undiluted hatred, got in her car, and tore out of my driveway. I stopped the recording and saved the file. It was perfect. It was the nail in her coffin. The final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap 2 days before the board meeting. I received an email from an anonymous, encrypted address. The message was short. "I can't let her do this. We'll all be ruined. I'm the HOA treasurer. She's been stealing." Attached was a password-protected zip file. A second email arrived a minute later with the password, "No more tyranny." I opened the file. It contained scanned copies of the HOA's bank statements for the past 2 years, along with their profit and loss statements and budget records. My inside source, a man I would later learn was named Arthur Finch, a mild-mannered accountant who had been bullied into silence by Karen, had given me the keys to the kingdom. I spent the next 4 hours cross-referencing the documents. The pattern was blatant and insulting. Dozens of charges on the HOA debit card at high-end restaurants, spas, and clothing boutiques, all categorized under community relations or office expenses. A recurring monthly payment of $5,000 for landscape beautification to a company called Miller's Lawn and Garden. A quick search of state business records revealed the owner of that company was one Gerald Miller, Karen's brother-in-law. I called 2 other reputable landscaping companies and got quotes for the same services. The highest quote was $1,500. Karen was skimming $3,500 a month, funneling it directly to her family. This was no longer about a cabin. It was about embezzlement. It was about fraud. I had started by defending my property, and in the process, had uncovered a criminal enterprise. The night of the emergency board meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. Word had gotten out. My insurgency had done its work, spreading the news of the upcoming confrontation. The Martinezes were there. Mrs. Gable was in the front row, looking nervous but determined. I saw a dozen other faces I recognized from my patrols. The room was a powder keg, and I had brought the spark. Karen and her 4 board members, 2 grim-faced men and 2 women who looked like paler, less confident versions of Karen herself, sat at a folding table at the front of the room. Karen, wearing an aggressive navy blue blazer with padded shoulders, banged a small, toy-like gavel on the table. "This emergency meeting is now in session," she announced, her voice dripping with smug authority. "The first item on the agenda is the hostile actions of Mr. Jack Callahan." She launched into a 10-minute tirade, painting me as a dangerous outsider who was threatening the peace and security of their community. She lied with an ease that was almost impressive, claiming my property was a known nuisance and that my belligerent attitude necessitated the board's actions. When she finished, she said, "The board will now entertain a motion to authorize our legal counsel to place a lien on this nuisance property." One of the grim-faced men immediately said, "So moved." "Second?" Karen asked, scanning the board. Before anyone could respond, I stood up. "Point of order, Madam President." All eyes turned to me. Karen glared. "You are not a member. You do not have the floor." "According to your own bylaws," I said, my voice carrying easily through the silent room, "any matter involving a special assessment must be open to discussion from all affected parties. As your next agenda item is a special assessment for a legal fund to sue me, I believe that makes me an affected party." I had a copy of the bylaws in my hand. The relevant page flagged. She was trapped by her own rules. She sputtered for a moment, then sneered. "Fine. You have 2 minutes." "Thank you," I said. "I won't need that long." I walked to the front of the room, where a projector and screen had been set up for a presentation she had clearly planned to give. I had brought my own laptop. "If I may?" I asked, unplugging her laptop and plugging in my own. Before she could object, the first image flashed on the screen. It was the county plat map. I used a laser pointer to trace the thick, undeniable line around my property. "This," I announced, "is the official, legally filed plat map for Serenity Lakes Estates. And this," I pointed to the words, "not included in this plat," "is the legal status of my land. The HOA has, and has ever had, exactly 0 jurisdiction over my property. Every action you have taken, the occupation of my cabin, the notices, the fines, has been illegal." The room was filled with murmurs. I clicked to the next slide. It was a still from the video of the A1 fencing truck, with Karen's furious face clearly visible. "This is a photo from 2 days ago, when President Miller illegally hired a contractor to erect a fence on my private land, an act of criminal trespass she attempted to coerce them into committing." I then played the audio, my phone connected to a small Bluetooth speaker. The room listened in stunned silence to Karen's screeching, unhinged tirade against the foreman. "You're fired!" echoed through the room, followed by the sound of her car speeding away. The murmuring grew louder. Karen was ashen. "This is not just a dispute with me," I continued, my voice hardening. "This is a pattern." At that cue, Mrs. Gable stood up. In a trembling but clear voice, she told the story of her bird feeder. Then Mr. Martinez stood and told the story of his son's basketball hoop. One by one, a half-dozen residents stood and spoke, their individual stories of petty fines and harassment weaving together into a tapestry of systematic abuse. Then, for the finale. And why? I asked the room. Why this obsession with fines and control? Why this willingness to break the law and expose this entire community to massive legal liability? I clicked to the final slides. The first was a bank statement from the HOA account, with the charge for Les Spa Exclusif highlighted in yellow. The next showed the charges for steakhouses. The next, the inflated contract for Miller's Lawn and Garden. "Because," I said, my voice like ice, "this HOA is not being run for your benefit. It is being run as President Miller's personal slush fund." I explained the landscaping contract, the connection to her brother-in-law, the thousands of dollars being siphoned out of their HOA dues every single month. The room erupted. The murmurs became shouts of anger and disbelief. Karen was on her feet, screaming, "Lies! These are forged documents! This is slander!" At that moment, a man stood up from the back of the room. It was Marcus. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of supreme confidence. "They are not forgeries," he announced, his lawyer's voice cutting through the chaos. "They are copies of the official financial records, and we have a sworn affidavit from the individual who provided them. My name is Marcus Thorne. I am Mr. Callahan's legal counsel." He let that sink in. "And I feel it is my duty to inform you all of one more thing. Because President Miller and the board acted illegally and far outside the scope of their authority, the HOA's directors and officers' insurance policy is void in this matter. That means they are not covered. The multiple civil lawsuits that are about to be filed against them for trespassing, theft, embezzlement, and fraud will have to be paid for out of their own pockets. Furthermore, any attempt to use HOA funds for their criminal defense would be an additional act of felony fraud." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on the homeowners. "Unless this body acts to remove them from power, right now, you could all be held liable for their actions. The choice is yours." That was the kill shot. He had turned her own people against her by showing them the bill for her corruption. Mr. Martinez, his voice ringing with newfound confidence, shouted over the din, "I make a motion for a vote of no confidence and the immediate removal of Karen Miller and the entire board of directors." "I second that motion," cried Mrs. Gable, her voice stronger than I had ever heard it. Karen banged her toy gavel, screaming for order, but she had lost control. The wave had broken. A man I didn't know, a resident with a powerful voice, called the question. "All in favor of removing the board, say aye." The response was a deafening, cathartic roar. "Aye." "All opposed?" Silence. The 4 board members sat frozen, their faces pale with shock. Karen stared out at the crowd, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. She had been utterly and completely routed, stripped of her power in a public forum, humiliated by the very people she sought to dominate. With a choked sob, she grabbed her purse, pushed past her former cronies, and fled the room. In the aftermath, order was restored, but it was a new order. An interim board was elected on the spot, led by a reluctant but determined Arthur Finch, the treasurer who had leaked the financials. Their first official act was to unanimously pass a motion voiding every fine Karen had ever issued. Their second was to issue a formal public apology to me. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. Marcus filed the civil suits, and the former board members, facing financial ruin, quickly settled, their personal assets liquidated to pay the damages. The district attorney, armed with the evidence from my binder, filed criminal charges against Karen for embezzlement and fraud. She and her husband were forced to sell their beige stucco house to pay for her legal defense. They left the neighborhood in disgrace. A change came over Serenity Lakes Estates. It was subtle at first, then obvious. A bird feeder appeared in Mrs. Gable's garden. The Martinez family's basketball hoop was back in the driveway, and the sound of a bouncing ball no longer felt like an act of rebellion. Lawn ornaments of questionable taste began to sprout. The oppressive, sterile silence was replaced by the sounds of a neighborhood actually being lived in. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of liberation. A few weeks later, the new board, led by Arthur, came to my property. They formally returned the pile of cheap furniture and presented me with a check for the full replacement value of my own items, had they been damaged. I declined the check. The victory was payment enough. As a gesture of peace, I invited the entire neighborhood to a barbecue by the lake the following weekend. It felt right to share the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim. I, the strange recluse in the woods, had become an unlikely community hero. That night, after the last of my guests had gone, I sat on my porch. The cabin was quiet, filled only with the familiar, comforting smells of old wood and the night air. Operation Lakeside Freedom was complete. I picked up the thick binder from the table beside me. I pulled the pages from their plastic sleeves, the threatening letters, the maps, the financial statements, the witness testimonies. The entire campaign, from the first shot to the final victory. I walked over to the stone fireplace, crumpled the pages one by one, and tossed them into the flames. I watched the paper evidence of the war curl, blacken, and turn to ash. The fire consumed the conflict, leaving only the warmth behind. I had been called from my peace to fight one last battle, not on some foreign shore, but on my own front porch. I had faced down a petty tyrant, and with the help of a few good people, had liberated a community. My name was cleared, my property was secure, and my peace was restored, deeper and more profound than before. The war was over. I was retired again. And this time, I had a feeling it would last.